Hi, Mystery Writers. I'm Zara Altera. This is the Mystery Writers Studio. And today I wanted to talk about pacing your novel because it's so important to keep reader interest. So, pacing is how, in a way, it's how readers feel as they're going along in your story. So, skilled pacing sustains that reader interest from the beginning right up to the end, that giant climax. And so, um, too much action, scene after scene, and your reader gets tired. Really, this is true. A lot of beginning writers think that if you have action scene after action scene after action scene, you're keeping your reader interest. But no, they're just like, oh my gosh, this is just too much. And it doesn't work very well. And then on the other hand, passages filled with long narrative descriptions slow down the pace of your story and can bore your readers, so you don't want that to happen either. So, pacing is all about creating balance in your story and balance in sustaining your reader interest. And let's look at some ways to approach your pacing. Just as a side note, the other day I was working with an author and they realized that they had some scenes that were long narrative. And what she said was that she wanted to tie up all the loose ends of the subplot before she got to the end, which is right. And so she wrote long descriptions of what happened as these subplots came to an end. And I said, well, you can probably reduce it down to 2 paragraphs by focusing on how those subplot tie ups affect your protagonist. That's it, you know. And so if the protagonist learns that Jill and Corey ran away, how does that impact them? And so you can really, there's really lots of ways to tighten up long narrative descriptions. Anyway, we fixed that. It was really great. So there are ways to fix things if you feel like you're getting stuck. All right, one of the best ways that you can sustain pacing is to have alternating active and reactive scenes. And just really briefly, Randy Ingermanson outlines the 3 basic components of those alternating scenes. So, for an active scene, you have a goal, a conflict, and a disaster. Something happens at the end. And at a sequel scene, or the reactive scene, you have the reaction to what just happened and the dilemma it presents, and then your protagonist's decision to respond however they might respond. And alternating these scenes may seem very simplistic, but your reader isn't going to notice if you do this well because you're sustaining their interest in the story, in the action that happens, and then the ultimate consequent decision that your protagonist makes. So you can build tension by escalating the conflict and raising the stakes, but you can just keep going with those scene alterations. It makes it pretty easy. Okay, is this an action scene or a reaction scene? And alternate them. And another way that you can help with pacing is to plan your story so you pretty much see how the story goes and what the progress is. And mysteries are plot driven, leading to the crime and the discovery of the villain. So throughout the story, you plant clues and introduce suspects. And planning helps you pace the active and reactive scenes as they lead to the next major plot point in your mystery. So for example, your detective interviews a suspect and their suspect may either be helpful or they may be obstructive, and then your protagonist needs to decide how they're actually going to interpret and deal with how that suspect acted. You can also use language to pace your story. And language can speed up your story and slow it down. So dialogue and action scenes speed things up. And I think I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Dialogue is action. It is actually characters doing something. And you keep those paragraphs short. And actually, visually, your reader sees a lot of white space and reads right down as things go on. And in descriptive passages tend to slow down your story. If you need narrative description, break it up into small parts that you dribble throughout a scene or a chapter, and that's going to help from bogging down your story with long descriptive passages. And then, of course, there is conflict, and conflict can be from small to big, major conflict. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. In order for conflict to work, your reader has to be invested in the character. So they must care about the character first. Otherwise, they won't care what happens when there's conflict. It's like they aren't emotionally invested in that character. So early on, introduce your reader to your character's vulnerability and their desire, and setting up this contrast introduces tension and prepares your reader for all those things that are going to happen later because they already know some things about your character. And then, of course, one of the things you want to do throughout the story to keep it from being episodic is to raise the stakes. So, as the story progresses, things become more and more important. And your protagonist needs that goal, and the reader needs to know the consequences of not reaching that goal. And the consequences are going to be not so great at the beginning of your story and get bigger and bigger as the story progresses. Mystery writers have a clear goal path, that's to catch that villain. But you also need to clarify what the stakes are if your sleuth fails. What if the sleuth doesn't catch the villain? Or what if there's a time constraint on catching the villain? And as your sleuth tries to solve the mystery puzzles, smaller goals and accompanying stakes help you build that conflict at the beginning so that when you get to the big important do or die stuff, um, you've already introduced conflict and the readers have an understanding of how your particular character reacts to conflict and what they do and what their fallback positions are and what their first reactions might be as well. Uh, and so to add complication, what if your character gets what they want, but getting what they want puts them in an even worse position than they were before? This is a really good way to raise the stakes. So they get an answer to a question, but it puts them in a bigger predicament. And then as far as mysteries go, spacing your clues also helps pace your story. So you don't have to dump all your clues at the beginning. You can keep having clues for your protagonist to discover as the mystery continues. And even in the third act of a four-act structure, you can still bring up new clues. All right. And then the very last suggestion I have for pacing is to read your story out loud. This is time consuming, but it really, really helps. Um, you're going to put yourself in the reader's place, and you'll notice how you feel as you read each scene, and you can pay attention to how the sentences flow. Are they fast, short sentences? Are they long, convoluted sentences? Did you find places to slow down or places where you need to speed up? Also, do you build momentum? Are you raising the stakes as you go? Does each chapter pose a new question at the end of the chapter? These are things you can check as you're reading your mystery out loud. All right. So essentially, pacing is under your control. You are the author, you're the creator of the story, and your writing is the vehicle for your reader to work their way through the mystery. And pacing helps them move forward and take quick breathers. You want both. You want to move forward and then, oh man, that fight scene was just too much, all right, as they plunge ahead to the next action. So, from murder to final reveal, your pacing sustains interest and builds tension and keeps that reader interest. And the mystery genre is all about creating puzzle pieces that at one point don't seem to fit, right? But fall into place as your sleuth puts everything in order. And I think that's our biggest challenge as mystery writers is to create those things that don't seem to fit as they're introduced, and then as things are revealed, they do fit, and one of them may be the major clue that actually points to the villain as the story progresses. Okay, I really hope that helps. Pacing is a big challenge. It's easy to be very episodic. This happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and that really doesn't sustain interest. So you want to keep it going from fast to slow and from action to reaction, and that's going to help you pace your story and keep your readers involved. As always, if you have any questions, please post them in the comments. I'm happy to answer questions. And thank you for being here and coming to the Mystery Writer Studio. And I will see you again next week.